we go. This is a tape with Dick Johnston on the 8th of April, 1992, at his home in Gallia. My name is Teddy Gasser, and it's taped about Mountain Drive for the Santa Barbara Oral History Clearinghouse. And Dick, if you want to say a few things, let's see if we're getting any kind of taped here.
Well, I'm sitting here ready to disgorge all the knowledge I have about Mountain Drive.
Okay, let's see if we got any of that. Okay, it looks like we're ready to roll.
All right.
It was taken. Gee, I see that it's the 8th of April, and you were born on March 8th, and happy belated birthday to you. You were born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I was wondering if you could give me just sort of a brief picture of your family and childhood.
Well, both my parents were scientists. My father was a heart specialist, an MD, and my mother was a biochemist with a PhD. And they worked through most of my early childhood, and my brother and I were taken care of by various maids that were hired, and which was all right. They were nice people. I don't remember a great deal of them. And that's the early childhood, and then I went to school in Ann Arbor until I finally gave up on getting a degree at the university and moved to California in 1957, to Santa Barbara, 1957.
Could you, when you moved here, could you describe what Santa Barbara was like?
Well, there was one traffic light in Santa Barbara at the corner of State and De La Guerra, maybe State and Korea, I think it's State and De La Guerra. When it got over 90 degrees, the Chamber of Commerce gave away free orange juice on the streets. And that's gives you a picture, you know. Now the Chamber of Commerce tries to get developers to build more vacant property. Santa Barbara has changed a great deal. Santa Barbara was a wonderful, sort of quiet, laid-back, sleepy little village when I moved here, and you could buy a house for $10,000 or less. There were no Hollywood stars living here. Well, maybe one or two, but no Hollywood stars. Nobody knew about Santa Barbara. Montecito has probably changed less than any other part of Santa Barbara, but it too has changed and been developed. Now Santa Barbara, I've thought of moving away from Santa Barbara if I could find a place with as good a climate and with people I knew, because it no longer is the glorious place it was.
How did you find it? How did you discover in 1957 this wonderful little jewel?
Well, I had friends in Ventura, and I was staying. I and a woman friend were staying with these people in Ventura, and I was looking for a job in radio broadcasting. And I got a job in Santa Barbara. I got a job at Harry Butcher's station, KIST, and moved to Santa Barbara.
Could you describe your first encounter with Mountain Drive? Was it at that time?
No, my first encounter with Mountain Drive, I think, I've tried to think about. There were rumors and stories about Mountain Drive that one heard almost immediately about these crazy people that lived up on the mountain and built their houses out of mud. But I think the first time I ever met anyone from Mountain Drive was in a play that I was in, the Repertory Theater, which no longer exists. It was over on Arlington Avenue just off State Street, up near the Fox Arlington Theater. There was an old house that had been converted into a theater. And there was a Shakespeare play being there. I think it was Hamlet. I'm not sure. But there were several people from Mountain Drive in that play. Among them, Bill Neely, I'm sure he was in it, and Tom Sheldon was in it. And maybe Frank Robinson, but I'm not sure about that. But I know that Bill Neely and Tom Sheldon were in it. And that was where I first met Bill Neely, although I wasn't, I didn't really remember that until that I'd met him at that time, until much later. Because I wasn't particularly impressed. I mean, they were seemingly rather normal people. And I wasn't in that play. I was in another play that was being put on subsequent to hamlet. So that my encounters with them were very, very brief, very glancing encounters. As we'd walk through the green room and pass, that kind of thing. So I really didn't. But that was my first meeting with anyone from Mount Monroe. And I didn't really become acquainted with it seriously until after I had my radio station, which was I became the owner of the station on the 1st of January 1963, and almost immediately I met Gil Johnston, and sitting around having coffee in the courtyard of the El Paseo. And then I met Frank Robinson, who had an office there. And just gradually, Gil Johnston invited me up to his house for dinner. After I'd known him for a while, I think it was in the summertime.
What was Gil doing at that time?
He was working as a classified advertising salesman for the news press. And I also gave him a job as doing a morning program on my radio station. And which he did very well. He became very popular. He became the most popular feature that I had on my radio station, calling himself Uncle Gil. The Uncle Gil program.
So he invited you up to Mountain Drive.
He invited me up to his house for dinner, and I met his wife, and then we went up to Sunset Club. And then after Sunset Club, we went up to the old hot springs for a hot bath, which is, all of this was rather new to me at the time. And I just, and by then I'd gotten to know Frank Robinson a little bit. Knew Gil pretty well. And met a whole bunch of other people that first time I went up there. And I sort of started going to Sunset Club after that. And hanging around on the 1st of November, right around the 1st of November 1963, I moved up there. I didn't move onto Mountain Drive, but I moved onto a house in Coyote Road, which was considered part of the community. And I stayed there for almost 20 years. Not quite. I left for the last time in '82, so it was 19 years.
So could you give me a physical description of the Mountain Drive area at that time?
Well, what do you mean by a physical description?
How it looked, what kind of houses, or what your impression, did they still seem just like normal folk?
Oh, no,
how
they
were
weren't normal folk at all. I mean, nobody who was a normal folk moved up there or was living there. In a lot of ways, they were normal folk. They were just more normal than other people.
More natural, perhaps.
More natural.
But the land itself, how did the homes, how did that all strike you?
There was a lot of adobe. A lot of the houses were built either wholly or partially out of adobe, and which bricks they made themselves. And the houses generally were quite impressive, I thought. Some more than others. Frank Robinson's house was extremely impressive. Jack Bogle's house, because of the setting, was extremely impressive, which is where Sunset Club is held.
Was there
But
any?
it was in sort of a dry, fire-prone area with a lot of chaparral around. Hotter than downtown Santa Barbara by a few degrees. A little less fog than downtown Santa Barbara. Quite a lot less fog than downtown Santa Barbara.
Were there any? Was there any building going on at the time when you first moved in '63, or had?
Well, there was always building going on, one kind or another, but most of it was additions and improvements. Most of the houses were there. Bobby Hyde's house was there, and Bill Neely's, and Frank Robinson's, and Gil Johnston's, although Gil was enlarging his house the first couple of years I was around up there. A major addition was being put on Gil's house. Ed Schertz was just beginning to start to build a house, his oval house up there, which is right above Gil Johnston's. But when I first went up there, he hadn't started, because I can remember I was present when the slab was poured helped with that, when Ed Schertz's slab was poured. And Stan Hill was not yet ready to build his house when I first went up there.
Do you remember any work parties? You said you helped Ed with his foundation. Were there
Oh,
other
there were
work parties?
always work parties. You know, for instance, everybody helped with major, you know, with major construction projects. Everybody helped out, and there were, you know, pouring a slab was one of the more major operations, and usually garnered the most people at any one time.
Mm-hmm.
But anytime anybody needed any help, it was a simple matter to get it.
Mm-hmm. How did they do that?
Well, by the telephone. You know, all these modern conveniences, and then ox cart culture, as Bill Neely used to say.
Okay, well, let's get back to describing what were your or describe your first impressions of Bobby Hyde.
Bobby Hyde had just about given up living there by the time I got up there, and I met Bobby Hyde, knew Bobby Hyde pretty well, but it happened over a long period of time, and I wasn't very impressed with Bobby Hyde when I first met him. But, you know, I got to know him more and became quite impressed with what he'd accomplished, which is considerable.
Why was he unimpressive?
I know he didn't talk much. He was a man with white hair. And I didn't know anything about him, you know, when his name had come up in conversations and
In what
and
context?
so forth. Oh, you know, Bobby Hyde did this and Bobby Hyde did that. Bobby Hyde, you know, the time that they were going to make olive oil. I suppose you've got that story many times over. Went down there. All the olives used to ripen up on Olive Street, which is lined with olive trees, as you well know. And nobody did anything. Nobody picked them. So we went down to Olive Street. And, well, I wasn't part of it. I didn't. This was before my time. But Olive Street was plucked clean by mountain drivers in one great communal gathering. You know, and there were pickup trucks full of olives. And Bobby Hyde had decided he was going to make olive oil. So he had this horizontal well drilling machine, and he connected. This is not my personal experience. I'm relating things that were told to me. But it's one of the famous Bobby Hyde stories
Right.
that I heard. And he had one of these meat grinders, the kind with the screw and the end where the stuff extrudes out the end with a big handle on it. And he'd taken the handle off and he'd hooked this thing up to the power takeoff on his horizontal well drilling machine, which was a great long, you know, it was probably 10 feet long, and a great rattly structure with an old Ford engine on it, you know, 4-cylinder engine that developed quite a bit of power. Anyway, they got this thing rattling along and chugging, and this grinder was spinning away, and somebody took a handful of olives and stuck them in, and it stalled it. So they found out that they could keep it going if they put olives in one at a time.
Whoa.
So days and days and days, you know, because in order to get any olive oil, you have to crush the seeds. That's the whole. You have to crush the seeds in order to get it squeezed enough to get any oil out of it. I don't know how much. I've never heard the end of the story. I just heard that it was a vast, useless undertaking, sort of typical mountain drive project. But that was one of the famous stories about Bobby Hyde that was circulated. You know, I met him, and I used to have some long conversations with Bobby Hyde in the late 60s. Say 66, 67. I think he died when 69. He died.
Someplace, I think, in there. I'm not sure if he's
Couple years before he died, I got to know him pretty well. And he used to come over to my house and sit around. We'd talk a lot. He was a remarkable man, and you know, at that time I thought that he was the originator of Mountain Drive, and it wasn't until some time later I learned that he wasn't.
How did you learn that, and how do you mean that?
Well, the basic concept of sort of a community where everybody owns a little plot of land and builds their own house, and was first started by a man and his wife named Tonetti in Snedden's Landing. It's right. It's across the Hudson River from. It's across the Hudson River from New York, and I don't know if it's New Jersey. I think it's in New Jersey. It might be in New York. We should put it further up the Hudson. But the man Tonetti was a sculptor. Very good sculptor, and he didn't turn out an awful lot. There's a lot of his sculpture in the Library of Congress. And there's one piece in the garden at 1088 East Mountain Drive, as there was a few years ago. But he was a recognized sort of a sculptor's sculptor, really. But he had a remarkable wife. I can't remember his name. I can't remember her name. Who I think was a dancer, but I'm not sure of that.
Were they not related in some way to the Hydes?
No, I'm getting there.
Oh, okay.
They had some daughters. They had 3 or 4 daughters. And one of their daughters, I think her name was Mary, was Bobby Hyde's first wife. And they had set up this community at Snedden's Landing, and that's how Bobby Hyde got the idea for the Mountain Drive thing long before he did it. Because it was set up back there by the Tonettis. And there's a book called The Tonettis of Snedden's Landing, and it's very hard to find. But there is a book which explains all this. You know, it's the story of the Tonettis, but Bobby Hyde is mentioned in there, and he lived back there. He built a house back there, and was part of the community back in Snedden's Landing. And it's, you know, it's worth some research, I think. You know, as the background of where the idea originally came from for Mountain Drive.
That's a wonderful piece of information. I had no idea that.
I'll tell you, if you talk to Bendy White, he might be able to give you a copy of that book. It was Alex White, one of the other daughters, who gave me the book to read in the early 80s or late 70s. And so I've seen the book, and I was told at the time it's extremely rare. And I gave it back to her, and she has subsequently died. She died in the last few months. But Bendy White, there's several Whites. Rod White, Bendy White, they're all her sons. They might be able to put you onto this book, and it's really worthwhile including it. Or you might be able to find it from a rare book dealer. I don't know when it was published.
What kind of go on.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering what kind of conversations that you'd had with Bobby, if you could relate any of those, any important ones that you remember.
Oh, we talked about building houses. I remember one of the first times I ever really talked with him was right after the Coyote Fire. I went up there, and he was trying to put some roof beams across his burned out adobe walls that were left standing after his house had burned down. And I kind of helped him for a while. And I was just sort of wandering. I was looking for somebody else, I guess, or just wandering around, which is a lot of common pastime on Mountain Drive. People just wander around and see what's happening. And you know, I helped him for 2 or 3 hours, and we got talking. That was the first time I really ever talked with him. I'd been acquainted with him, but had never talked with him very much. And I guess at that time we talked about how to build houses and how houses should be built to survive a fire, and a lot of different, mostly mechanical things, and later on I remember one story he told me, which I had heard other places, but he'd had a case of Chateau Yquem, which is one of the greatest of all French wines, in my opinion, the greatest of all. We had a case of it, and he had it holding up a corner of his bed, and his kids got into it and drank it. And he was enraged because their comment was it was too sweet. The stuff now sells for, I guess, well, the last price I saw for a decent year of that was about $175. At the time it sold for between $8 and $10 a bottle, which was a lot of money in those days. But it's so precious now that I can't drink it anymore. I used to. But I don't know. I can't really remember. He used to come over and we'd talk about the world situation and politics and everything under the sun. It's nice talks with him, but I can't remember in detail, except that I can recall it was very pleasant talking with him.
His philosophical stance, I mean, can you give me an idea what his...
Well, live and let live, generally. He was very uncritical of anyone and anything, although, I mean, not particularly of the government, but of the people around him. I mean, he was. He didn't criticize things that could obviously be criticized, or that I could criticize. But it's hard for me to know his philosophical stance because we didn't talk about that kind of thing. We talked more about hard things, you know. I can't really tell you much about his philosophical stance, although I'm sure there are a lot of people that knew him far better than I did. George Grayson, I think, knew him probably as well as anybody.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think George Grayson has a lot of tapes of Bobby Hyde.
Oh, really?
Conversations he had with Bobby Hyde.
And his, could you describe Floppy Hyde for me?
Well, Floppy Hyde was the business person in the family. They had a house to rent. It was Floppy Hyde that rented the house, and you paid your rent to Floppy Hyde. And if you needed a note or something transferred, I bought a house up there one time, and she had a second mortgage on it. She did all the business, and partly it was because her sons owned property up there. Her sons from a previous marriage. And partly because Bobby didn't like to deal with that kind of thing very much. Bobby's idea of doing business was that if you said it was okay, it was okay. And, you know, he sometimes had to write something down because the law required it, and lawyers required it, but he'd rather not have ever written anything down as far as any kind of business deal. I mean, he sold the property up there. I'm sure he got this 1,000 times. Sold the property up there originally for $50 down and $50 a month for an acre. And his handshake sealed it, you know. And everybody was on a land contract eventually. But you know, the paperwork came along later, and I assume Gil Johnston, I think, told me that. He had his house half built before he ever signed the contract, you know, which is one of those things that it's you know, I didn't know Bobby nearly as well as a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. But you did enjoy the long conversations.
But I enjoyed sitting. You know, sometimes it wasn't conversations. Sometimes I had this wonderful house on Coyote Road that was living in. I didn't see too much of Bobby after I moved up into the regular community. But he'd come over. And I had a hot tub, and sometimes people would come over for a hot tub, and sometimes he got there early quite often. And sit out in back, and there'd be this steaming hot tub, and sometimes he didn't talk, just sat there looking at the night, you know. He was one of the people that realized you don't always have to be making noise when you're in company with another person.
So you eventually bought land on Mountain Drive?
Well, I and a woman to whom I was married bought land and bought a house at 215 East Mountain Drive, which is down the little road from Mountain Drive down the, what do they call it, Pikes? No, they call it, I don't know what they call it. Somebody joshingly called it Peaks Pike after he bulldozed it into a civilized road nobody liked.
This is Laura Peak, or
Michael
Peak.
Yeah. Don't get me started on that.
Oh, give me just a little
This
hint.
is libelous.
Give me just a little hint. You can keep a libel
Begin
out
with,
of
he
it.
shot my cat.
Oh my God.
That's to begin with.
Uh-huh.
He also diddled me out of that house by forcing Floppy Hyde to start foreclosure proceedings because he had her strung up with something she needed in order to do something to get some land that she could sell, And he strung her up with he says you have to for it because he wanted his friend Tim Crawford to move into that house.
This is the house that you
This
were
is the
at
house that I
at
bought. I was in
215?
difficulties because my wife and I were divorcing, but I had just figured out how to arrange to get to pay her off, but I couldn't do it because I was foreclosed upon,
Mhm.
and I didn't learn until several years later that it was Michael Peake that was behind that.
Mhm.
So I have no kind feelings toward Michael Peake, and neither do most people. I think that you'll hear the similar stories from a lot of people.
Did that taint also your feeling about Floppy?
No,
No.
no, no. She's the one that told me about it actually, several years after it happened. No, actually, I always liked Floppy, and I was a little upset with her at the time, but well, I was very upset with her at the time. But I subsequently had some dealings with her, and she said, "I think you ought to know what was behind that
Mhm.
situation that happened."
So what year did that happen?
70 and 71. I got into that house in 67 and moved out in the fall of 71.
Did you build anything? Did you make any additions to the house?
Oh yeah, I built things on every place I lived. I remember one time I was building a storage shed out in back of the house in Coyote Road, and it required a slab to be poured. And Ed Schertz and I were looking at it, and we figured, well, he says, we don't have to call in very many people because this is, it was only an 8 by 10 foot slab or something like that, very small. In fact, we can probably do it ourselves, so I got a cement mixer. In fact, I traded the cement mixer from Robert Venable for an old kiln I had. Now, wait a minute. No, that's wrong. I traded the kiln. I got the kiln for the cement mixer. I'd gotten the cement mixer from some other trade. I forget where I got it. But I had this little cement mixer. So Ed Schertz and I just, mixed up a bunch of cement and poured the slab. Did it in the morning. And then I built the little shed on the slab. And then I put a tiled patio in on the other house, which was quite a good sized patio, and that required pouring a big slab, and that was one of the what required a major summoning of the forces up there, and I can't remember who all was there, but there were just about everybody was there. Helped pour that slab.
And which
put the tiles in it.
Which house was this?
This was the one at 215 East Mountain Drive.
Oh, okay.
I built this big covered thing out in back to be sort of a social center when I was having a hot tub.
So there were two houses, 215 where you built a patio, and which other one?
999 Coyote Road.
999. The shed was at 999 Coyote?
Yeah.
I see.
And there were other little things I built here and there. I did a lot of help. I helped Bill Neely a lot with various construction projects. He was building La Ruina. I did all the wiring
Mm-hmm.
in that.
You've had a long relationship with Bill Neely. Could you give me a description of Bill?
Oh, Bill Neely. He was by far, to me anyway, the most important figure on Mountain Drive. I mean, Mountain Drive would not have been Mountain Drive without Bill Neely. And I think it's really a shame that in the current stories that appear about Mountain Drive, Bill Neely is not mentioned. And it's
What do you attribute that
like,
to?
I attribute that to the old rivalry between Frank Robinson and Bill Neely, and that Frank Robinson is the one that's usually consulted nowadays, and he neglects to mention Bill Neely.
Mm.
In fact, there was a story recently in the Santa Barbara magazine about Mountain Drive, and it relates a story about how Frank Robinson went up to Mountain Drive by himself and met Bill Richardson. Well, that's not how it happened. I mean, I wasn't there, of course, but for years I heard the story how Bill Neely and Frank Robinson both went up to Mountain Drive and looked around because they had met Bobby Hyde downtown. They were living right near where Bobby Hyde had a house on Salsapueda Street.
They who
Bill Neely and
Bill
Frank
Neely-
Robinson.
I see. They were together.
They were
together?
living in the same apartment building, I believe. They were going to the college up on the local branch of the University of California was up on the Riviera. They were going to school, and they met up there at the college. And the way I always heard the story, it may not be correct, but the way I always heard the story was that they had met Bobby Hyde, and Bobby Hyde said, "Well, I've got this thing going up in the mountains there, and if you want to go up and take a look, I'll sell you some land cheap and build a house." So they went up there, and they went up together, and with Bobby, and they each found where they wanted to build their houses, and Bill Neely bought 2 acres, and Frank Robinson bought 1, and immediately started building their houses, which is, I think, Bill Neely started in late 52, or in 52, and he finished his first place in 53. And Frank Robinson started right around the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's impossible for me to sit around and describe Bill Neely. I've written a novel which is almost entirely about Bill Neely, and while it's purported to be fiction, most of it isn't. Bill Neely is probably in my entire life the most interesting and complex person I've ever known, and he was about half good and about half evil. But he was the heart and soul of Mountain Drive. Mountain Drive would not have been what it was without Bill Neely at all. But when I first really met Bill Neely, I had met him at the Repertory Theater, but it hadn't registered. But when I had my radio station, I had gotten to know Gil Johnston over a period of from the 1st of January to the midsummer when I first went up there. But at that time, Bill Neely was in Yosemite as a ranger. And there were a lot of things going on then. Bill Neely's wife, Barbara, whom I only met once, briefly, was dying of stomach cancer. And Bill Neely was this constant subject of conversation at Sunset Club. Every time Sunset Club got together, Bill Neely was talked about, and I really began to wonder what or who was this Bill Neely. I hadn't met. He was away. While I was really getting acquainted with Mountain Drive, he was away. And it was sometime after he got back. His wife died very soon after he got back.
She was alone then on that. She wasn't with him that time?
She was, essentially she was alone, but there were an awful lot of people looking after her. Mountain Drive people. And I'm not too well acquainted with that particular situation. As I say, I only met her once, and that was very brief.
So anyway, she died soon after Bill Neely had come back?
She died soon after. I would say she died in late September, early October of 1963, and Bill Neely was not visible for a short time after that. But after we were doing these series of programs on my radio station, where we'd get a bunch of people in and sit around and talk about things, and it was absolutely completely free form. Do it for an hour a day. If we didn't have anybody to talk about or nothing to talk about, we didn't do it. But usually we did it. It was around noon. And I can remember, I don't know when it was. I think it was in November of '63. But in walked Gil Johnston with this man who I hadn't met. Very clean-cut looking man, no beard, no mustache, wearing a sort of a brown twill shirt like something a park ranger would wear, and very highly polished brown boots and maybe Levi's. I'm not sure about what pants he was wearing. And we were sitting around, and I can remember we were talking about the John Birch Society. Donald Jones, who was sort of a mountain driver. And Tom Sheldon were there, and you've heard this tape. And Gil Johnston came in. I don't think Frank Robinson. Yeah, Frank Robinson was probably there. A woman named Garland Harris was there. I was there. And Bill Neely came in and took over. He just came in and took over. I was astonished, you know. And he spoke very well, very clear, clean, well modulated voice. I mean, I was really impressed. And he started talking about the Jackass Society. And it was, to me, it was just immensely funny. I mean, I didn't say much in there. I was sitting there and didn't say much in the whole program. But that was my first real meeting with Bill Neely, which actually happened to be recorded on tape. And I got to know him very, very soon, very quickly after that. I'm trying to place the time. He wanted to do a program on the station. You know, there's all kinds of... Mountain Drive was a very competitive place. If somebody had to do something, somebody else had to top them.
Let's this plane go over. I don't know if we're picking that up, but I'm having a hard time understanding. Okay.
Well, Mountain Drive was an extremely competitive place. For instance, Gil Johnston was doing a morning program on my station. Well, that meant that Bill Neely had to do a program on my station. So he decided he wanted to do something called the Gaelic Hour. And I had moved into that house on Coyote Road in early November of 1963, probably about the same time as that Jack Ash Society program was done. I really can't get the time sequence. But anyway, I know that he and I were tape recording the first Gaelic Hour on November 22nd, 1963. And we tuned in the radio, we finished it, and we tuned in, I turned on the station. And here was Tom Sheldon, who was working for me then, giving a newscast. And I thought, that's weird, we don't have any newscasts on at this time of morning. And what it was, he was talking about the fact that the president had been shot, Kennedy had been shot. And so Bill Neely and I climbed in the car real fast and whizzed down to the radio station. And we heard on the radio at the corner of Milpas and Cannon Perdido, right by the Arden Dairy where the old brown cow used to be, we heard that Kennedy was dead. And we walked into the station, and it was jammed full of people who'd come up there to get the news. And Bill Neely and I hauled the teletype machine out into the middle of it was in a little closet, and we hauled it out in the middle of the floor so everybody could look at it. But I can pin it down because of the fact we were doing the first Gaelic Hour on the day that Kennedy was shot.
Did that go through, or did you postpone that?
No, we postponed it because we didn't do anything. We carried network stuff and played music that whole weekend. And the Gaelic Hour did not go on that one. But it went on after that. It was on for, taped it every week for, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, as long as I had the station.
The Jack Ash Society went on for more than just one program, too.
Yeah, there were several programs done on the Jack Ash Society. I always thought the first one was the best one, because that was where I really saw this imaginative man, Bill Neely, at work. And we taped every Friday. We taped 2 programs up at my house on Coyote Road. We taped a Gaelic Hour, which we did first. And then we taped the famous wine tasting program, which was done in cooperation with the El Paseo wine cellar. And Pierre Lafond, he furnished us with the wines in exchange for the advertising we got out of it. And that was on for a couple of years and done every week. had some people that really knew a lot about wine on that program. Stan Hill and Jim George and Jack Bogle and Bill Neely were the basics people who really know a lot about wine and gave their opinions on whatever it was we were tasting. And we had a fight one time. Bill Johnston was sort of the police officer. Somebody came in one time. We were tasting wines, and it was sort of it was all very quiet and subdued and gentlemanly type of thing. And somebody came in and made some noise. Gil Johnston took offense and went up and slugged him. It was this horrible thumping and crashing. That was the only time I ever edited that tape. At that time.
So that never made the air. Huh?
That part of it never made the air. The rest of it, I cut that part of it out. Because after a while it all simmered down, and it was very funny because here were these people, Jack Bogle and Gene McGeorge and Bill Neely and Stan Hill, sitting around this table, little picnic table I had there, talking about wine, and here was this thumping and crashing going on in the background, and bang, crash, and well, it has a pretty good nose, I think. They tried to carry on, Finally, they couldn't. It just got to be too raucous.
I think that's
But it was a very, very, very funny scene. Mountain Drive was a very funny place. I don't think I've ever laughed so much as I did in those particularly early years of Mountain Drive.
Could you tell me a little bit more about how you got your radio station? How you left KIST?
Well, I just left KIST. I was there for about a year, and then I worked for KDB after that. I was a copywriter. And then I met a woman and moved to San Francisco for a while. And I heard that a fellow named Cameron Warren was about to sell his FM station in Santa Barbara. I'd actually seen it once because I'd applied for a job there one time. So I wrote him a letter and asked him what he was asking for it and what kind of terms he wanted and all this kind of thing. So he wrote back he wanted $50,000 for it, and he'd take 10% down. Or no, not 10%. He wanted $15,000 down. Of course, this is this station is now worth millions. Anyway, I wangled this, got a hold of the money he wanted for down payment, and bought the radio station. And it was a sort of halfway classical music station when he was running. He was running it from noon until 10 o'clock at night, playing mostly classical music. But he had a whole series of little dinky programs in the afternoon where he'd play different things. I'm not quite sure why he did that. But anyway, I put it on at 7 in the morning and ran it till midnight and played nothing but classical music all day long. And the only break was that noontime program where we had an hour of discussion. We did, newscasts at certain times of the day. And on Saturdays, played a lot of different music. Everybody who wanted to do a program could do their program on Saturday. Mm. So I think we were the first radio station in Santa Barbara that played the Beatles. Because that was, that kind of music wasn't played on the radio in those days. Not much anyway.
And only on Saturday
rock
on
and
yours,
roll
right?
was, considered pretty awful. And so anyway, and then Peter Feldman did a program on Saturday and playing bluegrass music. All kinds of stuff went on Saturdays. Broke the pattern.
Well, Peter Feldman is also an interesting person. We'll have to get back to him. Go on.
Well, that brings up the Scragg family, which I won't.
Go ahead and tell me about the radio station. We'll come back to the music and the Scragg family and some of that.
And then Sundays was the Gaelic Hour was broadcast on Sunday, and we did a couple of operas on Sunday, and the Gaelic Hour with which is Bill Neely's. I wish I don't have a tape with the Gaelic Hour. I'm sorely sad about that.
You have, how many of the tapes do you still have? I know I have the Jack Ash ones.
I have all the tapes that you have. I mean, but I don't have any more. I mean, I sent you all the tapes I had. I found out a couple weeks ago that somebody, the mother of a woman to whom I was briefly married while I had the radio station, her mother had tape recorded my whole Christmas Day programming on the station. She says, I play it every year.
Oh.
So what is it? I mean, that was 1963, 64, around in there. So she's still playing that stuff. It's almost 30 years later. It's incredible.
Who was this? Who was this? The mother of?
Mother of Maggie Norton.
Uh-huh.
And, well, you know, I don't know if you knew about this, but there was a notice in the paper 2 or 3 weeks ago of a Richard W. Johnston who had died up in Paso Robles, and there was a certain panic that buzzed around. Stan Hill called me up and says, "Are you alive?" I said, "I don't think so. I think so." He said, "Well, Gil Johnston is in a panic. You better call him out." So I called up Gil in Paso Robles and said the reports of my death have been somewhat exaggerated. Anyway, Mrs. Norton called me up later that afternoon and found out if I was all right. I guess she'd gotten the number from Gil. And I haven't talked to her for 25 years. And I finally told her I ought to die more often. It's fascinating, you know. All these people I haven't talked to for a long time. I do talk to Gil now and then.
Okay, to the music and to the Skaggs family and Peter Feldman and tell me who the Skaggs family were. And
Scragg. S-C-R-A-G-G. Scragg. It started when Gene McGeorge, who had a house over on Banana Road, referred to John Lazelle as being in his place over there as being the Scragg family. And I don't know where he got the name. But it sort of, as things did on Mountain Drive, it sort of got blown up, and eventually everybody had a Scragg name. Bill Neely was William Scragg. He put out actually a commercial product of wine vinegar, William Scragg's original and aromatic wine. In fact, I printed labels for him. I still have one somewhere. Gil Johnston was Oral Scragg. I can't remember what Frank Robinson, but everybody had a Scragg. I was Electron Scragg. Gil's wife was Trellis May Scragg, and their son was Maynard. Maynard Scragg. Well, anyway, when Gene McGeorge and Kaisa, his wife, and Peter Feldman, and I think that was the main group, formed a bluegrass group, they called it the Scragg family. And Ruby Scragg was Kaisa's name. And Gene McGeorge wasn't Gene's. Sometimes people use their first names, but I can't remember what Gene McGeorge's Scragg name, but nor can I remember what Peter Feldman. But they all had Scragg names, and they would appear on my radio station once in a while. But Peter Feldman did a bluegrass program on there for a while on Saturdays. And Saturday afternoon, anybody could do anything they wanted, as long as it wasn't illegal.
Wasn't Bill Neely a Scragg, played with the Scraggs as well?
He did occasionally, but he wasn't really. It was more, the Scragg family did classical music once in a while. I mean, he and Kaisa did a rendition of the Vivaldi concerto one time, which was not half bad. I think it was at a Christmas party. But Bill Neely had some musical talent, but not a lot. He could play a lot of different things, and he played the concertina probably as well as anything. Dick also played the cello a little bit, and guitar maybe. But he was not facile enough really to be a part of the Scragg family group, which was pretty good. They started getting some commercial engagements. Bill Neely had a little talent in an immense number of directions. And he's probably the best writer on Mountain Drive. Certainly the most fascinating conversationalist on Mountain Drive, and probably the most imaginative person on Mountain Drive. These are the good qualities. I won't go into the bad qualities because I'm sure that everybody does.
Tell me a few. Actually, everybody's been very careful to avoid all the bad qualities.
Well, I'll give you a very short paragraph, and I won't talk about it anymore. And it's only from my knowledge. I know he was convicted of child molestation in 1975 or 76, and was put on probation. That's probably the worst thing about Bill Neely. He was also what would now be called a womanizer to a rather extreme extent. And quite frankly, the only thing that I would say that he did was really wrong was to mess around with a little 6-year-old girl in a way that he shouldn't have, in a hot tub. And as far as the womanizing goes, that's more of a subjective field. I suppose that you've gotten a lot of people talking about what a male chauvinist place Mountain Drive was. I mean, nowadays, I wouldn't tolerate it nowadays. But I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about male chauvinism when I first moved up there. I wrote a novel, which had the first novel I ever wrote was about a bunch of people, sort of like mountain drivers, who got together and blew up an oil platform out in the Santa Barbara Channel. And I gave it to some people to read. I'll never forget Christine Walden gave it back to me and says, "Well, it's kind of fun, but it's horribly male chauvinist." And I said, "What?" I didn't know what she was talking about. But her comment, probably as much as any comment that ever been made to me, has made me do a lot of thinking, or made me at the time do a lot of thinking. I finally sort of figured out what she was talking about.
So,
but it's really difficult with people my age who have been brought up in a certain way, even with a mother who was an equivalent of my father as far as for his work goes. It's really hard to understand what these people were talking. I mean, I do now, but at the time I didn't know what these people were talking about. I don't know how common that is, but it took me a lot of thinking to figure it out.
So was it a male chauvinist society? And then how do you
Mountain
see
Drive
that now?
was a tremendously male chauvinist society. It was a hideously male chauvinist society. It was awful from that standpoint. I mean, I can view it that way now. At the time, I thought it was just good, clean fun.
What made it male chauvinist?
Well, for instance, they every year at the wine stomp, we elected a wine queen. All in the spirit of good, clean fun and winemaking and all that. One of the last few times I was at a wine stomp, which I guess the last time I was at a wine stomp was 1972 or 73 or 74 around there. Anyway, the women, you see, were relegated to the Bill Neely's house, while the men went down and did things like stemming the grapes and getting everything ready for the wine stomp, and in a secret ceremony elected the wine queen. And this ceremony was never supposed to be talked about. I mean, what went into electing the wine queen was never discussed. And the wine queen was announced after then there was a luncheon, which the women prepared. The women were relegated to the house up there, and their job was to prepare this luxurious luncheon, the vintage luncheon, before the. Were you ever at a wine stand?
No, I was never at a wine stand.
Which, you know, everybody partook of this marvelous feast, and it was usually very, very good.
So how was the wine queen elected?
The wine queen was elected in the way any other person is elected. I mean, there was nothing that special about it. What happened was that after we got everything ready, we had all the grapes stand in the vat, all full of grapes, and everything cleaned up. And Bacchus, there was a gilded statue of Bacchus. There were two Bacchus statues actually, but Bacchus had been repainted with gold paint, and all this was done. Everything raked up, and the place made it look nice. Everybody would sit around on grape lug boxes in a circle. And Frank Robinson or Bill Neely would conduct this thing. I think more often than not it was Frank Robinson that conducted it. And he'd say nominations for the post of wine queen are now open. And there were usually 4 or 5. Well, the subject had been discussed for a long time before this, about who would make a good wine queen that year among the men.
And what were the criteria for what would make a good wine queen?
Pulchritude. Nothing else. Oh, and there were a few other little side issues, like the woman. It was not customary to elect a woman wine queen who had not gone along to pick grapes. I think that was about the only other criterion. There was early on, there was this scam that the wine queen should be a virgin. And the only way they could be sure of it was to nominate a 4-year-old. So there was one time that the wine queen in the 50s was Maya Robinson, who was at the time 4 years old. That was. Anyway, that after the 4 or 5 women were nominated, the nominations were closed, and each person who had nominated the wine queen was expected to stand up and give a speech promoting the wine queen. I remember White Shirts one time nominated Queen Elizabeth. That was rather funny. And they eliminated her because she wouldn't be there. And Ed Shirt said, "Well, how do you know she won't be here?" Anyway, so then there was this extensive vote. It was a very complicated voting system where I think on the first vote everybody could vote for two people. It was drawn out to make it as long and complicated as possible. So there were 2 or 3 votes on it, and finally it got narrowed down to 2 people, 2 women. And the final vote was between the 2 women, and nobody, throughout the whole luncheon, nobody revealed who the wine queen was. The men thinking that the women are dying to find out who has been elected wine queen, whereas they are all dreading it.
Do you know that for a fact? Were they all
Sure.
dreading it?
Well,
Why?
no, I won't say that they were all dreading it, but it wasn't. They were not in great suspense
Oh,
over
right.
who this was going to be. The men believed that they were, however, thinking it was such a great honor to be the wine queen.
Were you at the famous filming of Seconds in
yes.
that grape stomp?
Oh yes. Yeah. It was exactly the same procedure. Leslie Hill was elected wine queen, and since there'd been no picking, the only criterion was pulchritude.
Mm.
We just got together in the late afternoon and went through that same old routine that we'd always gone through.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was there. It was quite a. Most of the, I the side note, almost all of the pictures that were in that Santa Barbara magazine article were pictures that Paramount took during that filming. None of those pictures were of a real Weinstein.
Those were Bill Neely's, or
Frank Robinson.
were
See,
those?
they used a picture that I took of Bobby Hyde without a photo credit, and I got really upset. So I called him up, asked him where they got the pictures, because I was thinking maybe Michael P. could give them the pictures, in which case I was visualizing lawsuits and things like that. But it was Frank Robinson who'd given them the pictures that they used in that thing, including the picture I took of Bobby Hyde, which is one of the best pictures ever taken of Bobby Hyde. They reproduced it quite badly, but.
Do you still have those photos?
Oh yeah. I'm not sure. I have an awful lot of photographs of Mountain Drive. I've got a. I should look into this downtown with a bunch of stuff. I think I've got a whole lot of negatives from various wine stops, which I've never really printed up. I took a lot of pictures at wine stops, but I didn't make very many prints of them. There are a few around.
Well, Bill Neely must have been quite instrumental in some ways also in regards to the filming of Seconds. Do you know how all that came about?
Oh yeah, I was there at the very first meeting. I was one of those that decided it was going to be all right to do this, because you see, Mountain Drive was a very xenophobic society, as well as male chauvinist. For a long time, it was just sort of an unwritten law, and I mean law. You didn't talk about Mountain Drive anywhere. It was a good thing. We had a good thing going, and we don't want anybody to know about this.
But everyone did know about it.
But everybody, well, sort of knew about it, but not really. I mean, I found the place to be a lot different than what I'd imagined it to be. I'd imagined it to be really raunchy and really, a bunch of seedy people running around half naked or naked, building their own houses, sort of, But it wasn't that at all. It was a very erudite. They were very smart people. Sometimes running around naked, but not as much as the downtown stories had it. They did build their own houses, but, most of the houses were illegal.
They seemed to have families, too.
And there was a lot of family. The women were pretty well subjugated. But the women made some attempts, when they realized that when the feminist movement began to simmer, for instance, the women started a meeting, an organization. I forget whether they had a name for it. I don't think. They're sort of an anti-Sunset Club group. Women were allowed at Sunset Club once a year. Otherwise, no women were allowed at Sunset Club.
When was that? When was that? Once a year?
I think it was I think it was around the time of the Chinese New Year, if I remember correctly. But I can't be sure. But I can remember that there was an annual meeting of Sunset Club at which women were allowed. Of course, if anybody had a real tight girlfriend, they'd bring them anyway. I mean, there were women at Sunset Club now and then.
I'd always thought it was Moonrise. I think there was another
The Moonrise Club, yeah, but the men call it Sip and Stitch. I was trying to think of the Moonrise Club, and I couldn't think of it. But I was remembering the Sip and Stitch, but I didn't want to come out with that until I remembered. MRC, the Moonrise Club, and that was the official name that the women called it, but the men call it Sip and Stitch.
Clever retort. So the first meetings then in regard to the films.
Bill Neely called me up one day and asked me to come over and says that there's this guy named Edward Lewis, from Paramount, who wants to film a wine stomp. And he says, I'm asking you and Frank Robinson to come over, we're going to talk about this, meet with this guy. So I went over there to Bill Neely, and we sat on the porch and drank wine, and Edward Lewis arrived, who was the producer of the film. And he came, I think, by himself that first time. And he said that what had happened was that they had gotten a screenplay from a guy, the guy who had been hired to write the screenplay from the book Seconds by Eli, James. His last name's Eli. I can't remember his first name. Maybe William Eli or James Eli. They had written a screenplay and they thought it needed something. It wasn't needed some beefing up. So this guy who lived over in Banana Road, who was the screenplay writer, I don't remember his name, had heard about the wine stomp, and so without really knowing much about it, he'd added a wine stomp scene. Well, they liked this, and so they also had found out from this guy that this really happened. And they had come up to wanting to know if we would put on a wine stomp for them. But in fact, I don't even think he knew when he didn't know anything about grapes or wine. He didn't know it was required to be at a certain time of the year when the grapes were ripe. He just didn't really know much about it. And so we said, well, you can't do a wine stomp because there aren't any grapes at this time of year. And he says, supposing we get you the grapes.
That's Hollywood for you.
Right. And there was an awful lot of discussion about it, whether we wanted to do this, whether we wanted the publicity, whether, they offered us $5,000, which went into the General Mountain Drive Fund. All kinds of other things, all the grapes, we got to keep the wine and all this and that, they'd get us some more wine vats, and they'd do all this stuff, and finally we talked about it for quite a while, and more and more people got dragged into it and into the discussions. And finally it was decided, well, okay. Besides, it looked like it might be a real interesting party, which I think was the thing that finally decided everybody to do it. And it was a horrendously big undertaking. It was gigantic. Bill Neely came down from Yosemite. I forget, it was done in July, around the 20th of July, in 1966, I think. 65 or 66.
The land had recovered, though, from the Coyote Fire by that time.
The land had recovered somewhat from the Coyote Fire. I remember still. But see, they didn't get all the stuff they wanted, so they came back to the real wine stomp later on to shoot some more stuff. Just a few people with some really fancy cameras and stuff. I remember John Frankenheimer sitting up on the bank above the wine stomp with his wife, but on the ground almost being, not much growing. And on a hillside that normally would be covered thickly with chaparral, and is now, I'm sure. Anyway, they came up and they arrived on, I think, the day before the event was to be filmed, and with these huge semi-trucks that were parked up on the top there, and set up lights and built this canopy around and put together, they brought up a couple of vats, one of which they put together to use in the film, and the other they gave to Bill Neely. I think it finally rotted before it ever got put together. It was a big vat. And we stood around and watched all this happening. Boy, it was something. Big lights, all these big lights up on the hill, side around the thing. And then they started it with the dinner, and they put on this fantastic feast, and they hired George Grayson to do this food, and I don't know how many $1,000 he charged him, but he put out this incredible feast, with whole pigs and stuff, he'd roasted in holes in the ground here somewhere, and just this incredible mass of food. And there were a lot of extra people invited because you needed a lot of people. So everybody invited, it was a rather carefully arranged type of thing. I mean, there weren't supposed to be any of the authorities.
Any of the authorities in what way?
Police,
Police.
that kind of people
Right.
would frown on this kind of activity.
They must have had some clearance, though, wouldn't they, from the city for all the film production units?
Nah,
and no?
nothing. No, this came in and did it. I mean, it was before the days of environmental reviews. And, I'm sure that it never could be done now up there because somebody would, squawk about fire danger or, something. I mean, no harm was done.
So there was this huge meal and
Huge
carefully
feast
selected guests.
Down at Jill Johnston's parking lot at his house, which was considered to be the best spot because it was level and it was large and could set up a lot of tables and there was room for camera people to be around. And that was done during daylight. That was done, I think it started around 4, 5 in the afternoon. Still quite a bit of daylight left. And I was there with the woman I was with at that time.
Who was that?
Brigitte Faser, to put it in English. She was German. She became the research, after she and I split up, she became the research director of the Santa Barbara Research Center. Made a lot of money, made a lot of inventions which allowed smart shells to hit people in Vietnam, and did a lot of things which I didn't approve of. Of course, it was none of my business by then. She married Jean Forcell subsequently. Anyway, there was a picture somewhere that Bill Botwright took. He was the only reporter allowed in. And he was allowed in because we all knew him. I think I brought him up to Mountain Drive. I think that was instrumental. Botwright practically became a mountain driver. He was working for the news press, and his whole outlook on life got so changed he quit his job. But he was there and wrote a story on it for the news press. But what happened was, as this thing was going on, and of course it got dark and all the lights came on, people could see the lights. This big glow up in the mountains. They could see it from downtown. People wondered what was going on, so they started driving up there. And with some foresight, Paramount had got a lot of rent-a-cops, and they had Mountain Drive blocked off, except for residents, But sightseers couldn't get close to it. Couldn't get close to it at all. But there was some discussion the next day about what had gone on up in the mountains. But it was quite an event. In the European version of the movie Seconds, the wine stomp scene lasts about 22 minutes, and shows full nudity, and all that. And in the American version, it lasts, I think, 5 or 6 minutes, and does not show any real nudity.
I recently saw the film on television, and they had cut those scenes completely.
I have a version of it on videotape.
Oh, do you?
I have the American version on videotape with the wine stomp sequence in it. I happened to tape it. I happened to see it was going to be on. I taped it when I was living in Philadelphia.
I was very surprised because I expected, oh good, I finally get to see the movie Seconds, and I watched the whole thing, and where it should have been, there was nothing. They needed something to spice it up, but years later they could cut it all.
Well, they cut it out so they could put more commercials in.
Right, exactly.
And no artistic consideration of those things.
Or maybe it's called artistic unlicensed or something. I guess there were a lot of other community kind of events too, plays, etc., that you've mentioned several times, the connection there with having met people in plays. It seemed like that was another great highlight on Mountain Drive, where the different Pyramus and Thisbe and
Bill Neely for a number of years wanted to do a play for the summer solstice party, and usually it was Pyramus and Thisbe, but twice he did a version of Lysistrata, and I don't know, I can't remember who wrote it. The version. Aristophanes wrote it originally, but there was a rewritten version that appeared in Eros magazine. I don't know if you've ever heard of Eros magazine, but it was a very strange magazine that put out 4 issues in a sort of a large hardcover format, sometime in the 60s. And in one of those was a rewritten version Lysistrata, which is just marvelous. Really wonderfully bawdy and a lot of modern idiom and really, really a neat version. So we just lifted that and did that version of it. and it was the first time we did it. It was just absolutely wonderful. I have a tape. I think I may have sent you the tape of it. It's not a very good tape, but you can get some kind of an idea of it. And Bunny Bernhardt played Lysistrata. And she, of course, is a marvelous actress. And well, the whole cast was just absolutely fabulous. The first time it was on, Stanley Glenn from the University Drama Department was there. It just blew him away. He thought he'd never seen anything like it. He just thought it was the most marvelous thing. He couldn't stop raving about it. It was great.
I heard that Dame Judith Anderson had been at
She was there. She was there at Pyramus and Thisbe one time, and I think the last time it was done, maybe about 1970, maybe a little before that, 60 maybe. But
So,
I was playing the part of King Theseus in Pyramus and Thisbe. About 5 minutes before it was due to start, I was introduced to Dame Judith Anderson, and I thought, oh boy. Here I am having to do Shakespeare in front of Dame Judith Anderson. Well, she didn't stay around afterwards. She left, and I thought, well, I don't blame her. But I just happened to run into her at this radio station at which I was working at the time. A few days afterward, it was less than a week afterward. And I asked her what she thought of it. She said it was marvelous.
so how did the plays get staged?
Well, Bill Neely did it. I mean, Bill Neely was the instigator, and not only of that, but of other theatrical productions. There was a Christmas play, sort of, Christmas program that she did.
Wasn't that for children?
The children did it, but Bill Neely was the quote director.
Mm-hmm. Oh, tell me a little bit about that.
And what it was sort of the Christmas story, acted out by the kids, and his son Jeff, who was at the time this was done, very small, 3 or 4 years old, blew the trumpet blast. That was always sort of the high point of it, this squawk. But the children acted out the Christmas story, and somebody narrated it. I forget who. I think I did it once. I think Bill usually did it.
Mm-hmm.
But the children, acted out the annual Christmas program on Mountain Drive. Then there was Christmas caroling, where the men all got together, no women. Well, there was a woman once, but generally it was another all men scene where a few days before Christmas, usually on a weekend, the men would go around Mountain Drive singing Christmas carols, and the idea was that they'd get invited in for a glass of wine, and by the end of the evening, everybody was pretty well smashed. But anyway, the Christmas program was, I'm not terribly familiar with the Christmas program. I'm very familiar with the plays, which Bill Neely directed, as a rule, pretty competently. And there were certain traditions of the Pyramus and Thisbe. A fellow named Ray Hawthorne played the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And he had no acting talent at all, and didn't know really what was going on. But he had this sort of bed sheet which had some bricks painted on it and a big hole in it. He gave his lines. And you've heard the tape. I think I have a tape of that too, which I gave you.
To go on and give me a description.
That was the one. The tape is the one at which Dame Judith Anderson was present. That was the time. I think that was the last time we did Pyramus and Thisbe. I'm pretty sure of that. I think that was in 1960. It might have been after that. Late 60s, maybe 1969, 1968.
And how was the cast picked out? Was it just from the same from year to year?
Yeah, it was just generally the same. I mean, Puck was played by Lorna Grayson usually, and George Grayson was almost always in it. And Tim Arset was in it. He was in it the year that I taped it. He was in it that year. He played. Oh, wait a minute! They reversed the roles. They had a man playing Thisbe, and a woman playing Pyramus.
Just to make it more confusing.
Thought of that idea. Wasn't Bill Neely? He didn't like the idea. But everybody overruled. Bill Neely could be overruled occasionally. Sometimes by a walkout.
How did he respond to that?
He gave in.
Capitulated.
He capitulated. See, there was a constant rivalry between Bill Neely and Frank Robinson to top each other, I guess you'd say.
Mm-hmm. Can you detail that a little more?
Well, no. It's hard because I really knew it was going on and could see it from time to time, and just that they would try to out-costume each other and outdo each other. But Bill Neely was such an imaginative talent that nobody could outdo him. And Frank Robinson, of course, wanted to be the leader. And I can remember one time him sort of confidently telling me that Bill Neely thinks he runs Mountain Drive, but he really doesn't. I do. That was very early when I was like, I'll never forget that. But the two of them really were the people that ran Mountain Drive as much as it ever had to be run.
Perhaps they needed the spark, each other's spark.
I think there was some of that.
Wasn't there also a huge controversy about the wine cellar?
Well, yeah, that was who owned the wine cellar. Well, Bill Neely and Frank Robinson had built it together. Bill Neely says, well, it's on my land, therefore it's my wine cellar. Well, the fact of the matter was, it was on Bobby Hyde's land. It wasn't on either one of the property. And I think Bill Neely and Frank Robinson's land had joined each other for a brief stretch.
You were also learned potting. Bill Neely was a great potter, and and I know that you also potted with him for a while. Could you tell what he was like as a teacher?
Very good teacher. I took his pottery class just as sort of out of curiosity, see what it would be like, and I got very interested in it and did a lot of. In fact, I had a whole pottery set up on back of my house on Coyote Road, which I moved up to the other place, but I never did much pottery up there. You know, I made a lot of pottery, and I sold pottery at the Pot Wars, and did pretty well at it.
Describe to me the Pot Wars and how that came about.
Well, I'm not really sure how it came about. I have in my novel, I have a scene. This is one of the parts one of the few parts that's fictional. Is that Bill Neely and well, I better not tell you the fictional part. I'll just say I don't know how it came about, but it came about because Ed Schertz and Bill Neely were both potters. Schertz taught by Neely. And they decided that they'd have what they call a pot war, in which they'd try to outdo each other in selling pottery. And every now and then, it happened more than once. Every now and then, one or the other of them, I think Ed Schertz thought it first, would say that if any pot that isn't sold by 6 o'clock will be smashed. This is in my book, but this is also actually happened. That several times that one or the other smashed all the pottery they had left that they hadn't sold. But then it got to be, at first it was just the two of them selling pottery, but then gradually other people began to sell refreshments and other items up there at the time of the pot war.
Did you sell?
Yeah, I sold quite a lot of pot. I made $900 once at a pot war,
Whoa.
which was not nearly what Bill and Ed Shirts made.
Mm-hmm.
But I was amazed, you know, tiny little cups and stuff that I made. I did pretty well at it.
Mm-hmm. You must have had a large backlog.
That bowl that's back in the corner there is, I think, the last thing I made. Yeah.
Oh, it's a pretty
And I think
bowl.
it's too heavy in the bottom. But I like the shape of it real well.
I like the glaze too.
Yeah, I like
it's a
the
pretty
glaze.
glaze.
But that, I
Very
think, is the
nice.
last thing I made. Last pot I made. And I don't, it's one of the very few I have. Maybe the only thing I
I
have.
love this wonderful lip, that wonderful sort of
Yeah.
square lip with that
Yeah.
beautiful
Yeah, I made
blue-
nice pottery.
blue-green. Yeah, you did. Was it difficult adjusting, doing with one hand? Is it wheel throw?
Well, I don't know. What was difficult now is the way I had to do it.
Was it
And
difficult?
I
to
couldn't do big stuff. I did mostly small things.
How did Neely teach you?
Well, he didn't. I had to figure it out for myself. I mean, he taught some basic principles, like you have to get the clay centered,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, before you can, then you stick your thumb in it, and you know, he would give me the methods of doing it, but I had to sort of figure it out for myself, how I did it.
You certainly did it beautifully. Which I've also heard. I've also heard from I've forgotten the teachers. Not from Ed, but I think from someone else that was speaking about your pots and how lovely they were. And you don't pot anymore.
I haven't done any of that since.
You computer.
I haven't done any pottery. I did a little bit of pottery with Mary Burton. I made some stuff for her, threw a few things. But I figured that after I'd done a little, it was going to take me so long to get back into it, you know, and do it really well, that I wouldn't bother.
Mm-hmm.
I could still do it, you know. I mean, I could still make a center of the clay and make a pot, but to do the really nice stuff that I used to do, it wasn't. You know, it's been 15 years, 20 years since I've done it.
Could you talk a little bit about any kind of activities that the Mountain Drive community was, that you know of, that was involved in the larger community? Any kind of political or arts or?
Well, not much. There was Mountain Drive entered a float in the Fiesta Parade one time. You may have heard of that. It was a wine stomp float. It received some attention, but not the kind we wanted.
What kind of attention?
This was done at right at the time I think it was summer of '63. Right at the time I was getting involved with Mountain Drive, and I wasn't involved with it. I was going to Sunset Club, I think, at the time, and heard a lot about it, but I wasn't involved in it. I was not involved in fooling around with the float or making it or anything. I just sort of. And I watched it go by, and I really didn't know anybody at the time. I knew a few people, but I didn't know the people who were on the float. I subsequently got to know them. But it was right when I was first becoming acquainted with Mountain Drive. I'm trying to think of anything else. Mountain Drive was pretty much its own thing. It did not interact much with the community. I think that, my radio station was a very interesting. That was the first time Mountain Drive ever became public, but Mountain Drive wasn't mentioned. It was a bunch of people who were doing strange things on a radio station, but it had nobody. You know, there were people that knew that these people were Mountain Drive people, but not too many. And Mountain Drive was not talked about much, if any. Somebody might say, "Well, we live up in the mountains," you know, something like. But you know, Mountain Drive was not talked about.
They didn't refer to themselves. How did they refer to themselves?
Well, they referred to themselves as Mountain Drivers, but not on my radio station.
I see.
Now that was you know still during the period of extreme xenophobia. Yeah, you know, that was talked about, that we don't want Flatlanders coming up here and getting in the way.
But a lot of people did come up and go up to visit Mountain Drive.
Well, I would not say a lot, but there were people who were downtown people who lived downtown who were considered to be mountain drivers.
For example.
For example, the Martins, Tom Martin and his wife Jan. I don't think they ever lived there. Well, maybe they did. Maybe they did. Maybe they did. Bill Botwright was one person I can think of who became a mountain driver even though he never lived there. He was a reporter, a very good writer. In fact, he was their star reporter until he got this whiff of something different, which ruined him as a commercial human.
Seems like a lot of people in some ways got quote unquote ruined. Maybe that's only a wrong impression. How do you feel about that? How do you see that?
Well, I don't think they were ruined at all. I think they came to their senses. It's like Bill Clinton, who never inhaled marijuana. Well, I think a lot more of him if he had and still did, I think they ought to be asked how much they drink. I don't think they ought to be asked whether they ever used marijuana. It's completely the wrong approach.
I guess I consider the price that Bill Neely paid the price of heavy drinking, and several other people pay the price from those years of living not living fully.
Yeah, well, Bill Neely was an alcoholic, which I didn't recognize. I didn't know it for a long time. And one of the reasons I didn't know it was that he functioned very well all the time. But he ruined his liver. And I think Bill Neely was probably the heaviest drinker on Mountain Drive, although Ray Hawthorne did a lot of drinking and also died. And I did quite a bit of drinking, but not for very long. I found I didn't like being drunk, and I didn't like having hangovers. So I drank wine, but not very much.
How would you describe the other drug habits of Mountain Drive?
Well, marijuana was big on Mountain Drive for quite a long time among certain people, even Bill Neely, who condemned it as being an extremely sinful thing. Once he got onto it, he had it in his pipe all the time. And he was so blasé, I don't know if that's the right word, but he didn't give a damn whether it was illegal or not. I mean, if he wanted to smoke marijuana, he'd stick it in his pipe and smoke it, whether he was downtown or anywhere else. And he got so he really liked it. And I really like it. I mean, I if I had it, I'd smoke it. I don't have it usually. But it's to me, it's much better than alcohol as a mild intoxicant. Well, it was maybe about the time that drugs came in, and I think that since alcohol didn't really hurt Mountain Drive as a maybe it did, but Mountain Drive at its peak, when it was fully functional and going full pulver, was a very alcohol-ridden place. I mean, there was a lot of wine drinking going on Mountain Drive during its great years. I think it was other things that destroyed Mountain Drive, not drugs.
What were those things?
Well, I think it was the fact that the commercial it became fashionable, in quotes, like Greenwich Village. It became known about, and which is the thing that everybody had always feared. It became, about the time that a certain mountain driver and his wife appeared in Vogue magazine, that was about the time it began to collapse.
Who was that?
Michael Peake and his wife.
Oh, I see.
Right, photographed right outside their house on Mountain Drive. And it became fashionable, and the property values started skyrocketing. And when that happened, the right people, and I'm talking about the people who originally formed Mountain Drive and made it great, they couldn't afford to live there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, it disappeared. In essence, it's gone. There are still a few of the old people living there, but the great spirit has gone.
Mm. The sense of community seems, although I don't know, how would you describe that sense of community? Do you have anything still to do with?
I don't see anyone there anymore. I have visited Frank Robinson, but it's just not. It's just not going. It's just not happening. It doesn't. It's not going up there anymore.
Mm-hmm. Although there are some festivities that still occur.
They still have a 12th night party, I understand it. But the old mountain drivers aren't invited to the 12th night party, which I suppose is all right. I probably wouldn't go anyway, because I don't think I'd know anyone. And I think that there was a certain spirit that maybe held on until Bill Neely died. But I wasn't there. I was living in the East from 1982 until 87. I lived in Philadelphia, so I wasn't aware of what was going on in Mountain Drive. I heard about Bill Neely's death, but not until 2 or 3 months after it happened, which was a horrible shock.
I can imagine. How?
That hit me really very hard. Because he was a very good friend of mine. Probably as close a friend as I had up there. And I was one of the few people that never had a big fight with Bill Neely. I had some disagreements with Bill Neely, and I just wouldn't see him for a while, and they would blow over. But I never had any big fights. Everybody up there had major fights with Bill Neely.
Do you know the causes or circumstances around any of them?
Oh, women. Women. What the character of the wine stomp was supposed to be. Who was in charge of this or who was in charge of that. Insults. Imagined insults. I mean, it was a bunch of very, very sensitive people up there who could get set off. You were dancing with my wife too much, that kind of thing. But Bill Neely would go through periods too where he became angered at the entire community and would sort of shut himself off from all activities. Not for long, and it always was carefully timed so that it didn't interfere with the wine stomp. But he was responsible for the wine stomp and the summer solstice party, which were the two of the major festivities. The wine stomp, of course, he would never allow that to be called a party. He was very adamant that it was a serious winemaking, not a party. This is not a party. Which, of course, it was. But
what do you consider some of the unifying factors on Mountain Drive?
Well, I think the parties were a big unifying factor. I think the fact that, things like the wine stomp, the communal activities, the fact that everybody helped everybody else out when they were building something that required assistance. I mean, it was not hard to get help. It was not hard at all to get help. I mean, you just drop the word that there's going to be some project going on sometime, and everybody would show up. It was very easy to get a lot of help. That was a very unifying factor. I think another unifying factor was that we're here and they're down there. It was everybody was up here looking down at the rest of the world. I think that's just the location of it up in the mountains there, 1,000 feet above sea level.
Mm.
Had a great deal to do with the fact that it was a unified place. And we don't want them to know about us.
Mm.
That was very, very big when I first went up there. And I gather it had been, but it kind of deteriorated. And I think maybe it was the cause of the downfall of it to some extent.
Is that they wanted to remain so far?
They didn't want anybody to know about it. The xenophobia, when it kind of dispersed, may have been the reason it fell apart.
Mm.
Well, there were other things. I mean, it just kind of entropy. I mean, it just kind of ran down. Bill Neely got charged with child molestation.
That must have been a shock for the community too.
Well, a lot of people didn't know about it. I think everybody knows about it now, but at the time it happened, not very many people knew about it. I didn't know about it. I was told about it by somebody who did not live on Mountain Drive.
Mm. That seems a hard thing to keep secret in a small community.
Well, there were a lot of secrets up there. It was a tight-knit community in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it wasn't a tight-knit community. A lot of times, when I was first up there, it was much tighter than it was when, 10 years, 12 years, 14 years later when it was child molestation. I knew the young woman involved, the young girl involved, because she was a very close friend of my daughter's. And my daughter could have been the one molested by Bill Neely. Except I do think that Bill Neely knew that if he did that, I'd kill him. I mean, I don't think, I think he just stayed away from her, and nothing ever happened with her. But however, she was in the same situation.
Mm.
It could have happened with her.
Mm. Did you ever talk to Neely about it?
Never.
He never knew you knew?
Never knew I knew. I didn't associate with him an awful lot. About the most association I ever had with him after that was at those Wednesday night dinners where I first met you, where you were up there.
Right.
That was
Early
my
80s.
major association with him. My daughter was there.
Jessica, I remember her.
Jessica. That's her now.
Wonderful. It has been a long time.
She will be 21 years old
Oh, jeez.
in a few days. She is living in Canada with her mother in Ottawa. She's a Canadian citizen,
Uh-huh.
also an American citizen.
I guess you will have to choose sometime soon.
No, you don't have to anymore.
You don't? Oh, really?
No, you can be
Oh,
both
how
now.
lucky. Did she spend a long time on Mountain Drive?
Well, she grew up sort of on Mountain Drive. She has very strong memories of Mountain Drive. Later on. She was around Mountain Drive until she was 10, 11 years old. She remembers a good bit about it.
Describe what it was like for a child on Mountain Drive when she was young.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have kind of wondered about the Mountain Drive children. Very few of them have gone to college, which to me was very surprising, because almost all of the parents had either gone to college or were college graduates. There were some advanced degrees up there. And it surprises me a lot that such a small percentage of the children that were raised on Mountain Drive have gone to college. I can't be exact. I don't know. I mean, I have that feeling, and I can't really. In some ways, they may have gone late. But when most of them became of college age when I was up there, they did not go to college. And I find that surprising.
Do you have a suspected reason or
No.
reasons?
No, I don't.
Mm.
I haven't thought about it an awful lot. I've done a little thinking about it. Not recently. I don't know. I don't know why it is. They went to a Cold Spring school where most of them went to grade school. It's considered one of the best elementary schools in the state. I mean, it's to me it's very surprising.
Maybe it's a disdain for all things that were
Maybe a disdain for
downtown.
convention. I don't know.
Convention, right?
I don't know. It's hard to say. But I find it very surprising. I think that one or two of Frank Robinson's 6 children went to college. None of Bill Neely's children I know went to college. He had 6 children. One of them died. Benji died.
Yes, the Neely family had a number of tragedies, it seems.
Yeah.
What do you think people needed to survive on the land there, or to become part of the community?
Well, I think everybody was different. I think everybody had something to offer that the group wanted. May have been just the ability to socialize, or a talent, or just wanting to be part of it. I got involved there because of my radio station. I'm not sure I would have otherwise. I might never have gotten to know anyone there if it hadn't been for my radio station. But I loved it. I mean, I thought it was the most astonishing situation I'd ever been in. I couldn't believe it.
What astounded you most?
I loved it. I mean, I don't know, just everything. I mean, the people. I mean, I particularly liked Bill Neely. I mean, I really admired Bill Neely. I don't admire him now quite as much as I did then, but I can also think back and see, one of the problems I have with this Mountain Drive novel, if it's going to really be a novel, I got to carry Bill Neely up until the time he dies. And I haven't done that. I've quit about the point where he, started having problems. And so what it is it presents Bill Neely as a complicated person with good and bad about him, but none of the real bad. Hints of it maybe, but not the real bad.
I get the sense some...
And I don't know whether I do know that I ought to go on and finish it. I shouldn't stop where I did. I should, if it's going to be a real novel, I should go on. And it's about Bill Neely.
I guess my sense of hearing you talk is almost a tragic, maybe I'm reading my own feelings into it, was sort of a tragic hero. I mean, that his fate is sealed somehow in his very character.
Oh yeah. That's true. That's very true.
It must be difficult, that endings can be difficult.
Yeah, well, I should get it together and finish it.
Oh dear, I'm reminding you of these things to be done, huh?
Well, I started rewriting it from the beginning, a couple months ago, and I rewrote the first chapter. And it wasn't a long novel. It was only about 50,000 words. It wasn't a very long novel, but it ought to be. And I really, and most of it's true. Most of it's absolutely true. Most of it's all based on things that really happened. Which, of course, any good story is. But I really ought to go on and finish it.
Does it have a name yet?
Well, it's just called Mountain Drive.
Mountain Drive. So far.
Mountain Drive, a novel of sentiment.
Could you describe a little bit some of the other characters? I don't know very much about Bill Richardson. Do you?
No, I don't know much about Bill Richardson either. He was pretty much out of the mainstream. He'd appear at the Bobby Burns party and do a sword dance every year, and that's probably the only time I saw him. I knew him enough to speak to him and say hello, but I didn't know him well. But he was one of the people that were first up there. One of the very early ones. Mervyn Lane's another one. I know him a little better. Marty Birdsell, I knew pretty well.
Yeah, describe Merv Lane for me a little bit.
Well, Merv Lane is a good writer. Very good writer. Teaches at the City College. I don't know him well. I don't know him well.
Mm.
By the time I got up there, he was, again, sort of out of the mainstream, although not as much as Bill Richardson. Mervyn Lane would show up often at Mountain Drive parties, whereas Bill Richardson seldom would.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you think that all
And
showed
certain
already?
people had their certain specialized niche. Like Jack Bogle was the owner and operator of Sunset Club. Always took place at his house, and I guess it still does. I think he's dead. I think I heard that Jack Bogle
Did he
died.
die?
I don't know. Somebody told me this, and quite a while ago, and I don't know whether he is or not.
Well,
He wasn't well. He had Parkinson's
Yes, right.
disease quite badly. Last time I was up, I've been to Sunset Club once since I got back from the East,
Mm.
and I found it so depressing. I didn't want to go back.
What was depressing?
I don't know. Decrepit old men sitting around complaining.
I don't imagine it still occurs since he's went off to live with Sushant.
Did Jack go off to live with Sushan?
Yes,
Oh, I
several
didn't-
years ago. 3
Oh,
years
really?
ago.
Oh, I didn't know.
I can't remember, someplace in, I don't know if the Central Valley or the.
I didn't know he'd
towards
left.
Texas.
Somebody told me he died, and this was a while back, and I never followed up on it. I thought it was probably true, but it happened so long before I was told. There wasn't anything to
As
do
of
with
a
it.
year ago, a year or 2 years ago, he was not dead. As of
Mm.
a year ago, he was not dead because I had him. I sent him a letter and got a response.
Huh.
I had failed to have him do a release form, and he sent me back the release form.
Well, he
So
sold
he
his
was-
house or gave his house to a couple of guys, and one of the conditions was that Sunset Club was supposed to go on.
Oh, really?
Now, whether or not it is going on, Frank Robinson. I should go up and see Frank Robinson. He was a good friend.
You know Cuthbert Chisholm.
Sure. Is he still around?
He was, as of the time I wanted to interview him, but I don't know if he's going
No,
to
he's
let me.
one that never lived there, but who was a mountain driver.
I see.
Peter King was a mountain driver who never lived there. He lived briefly, I think, in the area. I think he rented John Stack's place when John Stack had a house in the middle of the Westmont campus.
Before
But Peter King is the one that started the 12th night.
What was his wife's name again?
Fox.
Foxy.
How many people have you interviewed?
Gee, I'll give you a list later.
Well, I don't need a list. I just
Or
curious
not a
about
list,
numbers.
but probably about 20.
Yeah.
Maybe more than that now. Running on to 30, perhaps. So,
Yeah, that's great.
so yeah.
Did you ever interview Bill Neely, or did the project start
It started after his
after
death.
him? Do you know?
I must say that.
You know Alexandra Cole
Alexandra Cole.
has a house over in Banana Road.
The name Alexandra comes familiar. I didn't associate it with Cole.
Alex Cole was
Alex
Bill Neely's
Cole.
girlfriend, woman friend
Oh,
for
yes,
many
that's
years.
why. Alex Cole. That's right. Yes.
She has his diaries,
Does she?
so you
Uh-huh.
might look into that. I've been thinking about looking into it, but I haven't figured out how to approach her exactly.
You know, are you sure that she did? I talked to Chris. I think Chris may have them back again.
Oh,
Chris
Chris
Neely.
Neely, because I was up there in '87. Last time I'd been up there at Neely's place, and I was talking with Jeff, and Jeff told me that she had the diaries.
I've talked to Chris. I can't remember. Maybe he was speaking of something else, but I think that he may have the diaries back.
Mm.
I can check. I think he references it on the tape that I just did. So I can check. I did get to read some of his diaries during his World War II. Some of the beginning kind of things. He was a good writer.
Oh yeah.
And his imagination was wonderful. I remember his
Vast talent.
his grandmother and all of his different sort of fairy stories for entertainment, and
Yeah.
penguins, and his prodigious talent for foreign languages to be able to speak
Yeah.
them. So I his I think my connection with Bill Neely, although it was was really very minimal, I was also attracted to the strong, I don't know, imaginative talent that he had, and also his ability to be outdoors. I really enjoyed the nature part of him, and the his being able to identify all the flora and fauna as one drove along and sing bawdy songs at the same time.
Well, I
So.
don't. Yeah, he had this remarkable talent for going on a camping trip with Bill Neely over in the back country here was just a fabulous experience.
Mm-hmm.
Just wonderful. I did it a few times, not very many, 4 or 5 times.
Right. I did not know him well, but I did appreciate that, and I think because of his life is also the interest of his project, as I see it too, and I'm also always a little bit astounded that he's mentioned as seldom as he is. Although by some people yes, and by some other people not.
Well, I
But
think it's still that traditional rivalry
mm,
because people talk to Frank Robinson about Mountain Drive, and I think there's a little of that
mm,
old rivalry there,
mm,
and he doesn't mention Bill Neely.
it's a shame he can't be present to get interviewed here.
Yeah, because he'd certainly have a lot to say.
He was never at a loss for words.
Never. Never.
There, could you talk a little bit about your time as editor of the Grapevine?
Well, I was sort of editor by default. Nobody was doing it, and I really there were a bunch of people around. Michael Fagan. This was well, I did it off and on for a number of years. Linda Bakke, to whom I was married and bought the house at 215, she wanted to do it, and so she and I did it for a while. And then we quit doing it, and I redid it again when I was living up at Joel's house. But there were a group of people around. I forget exactly who, but Michael Fagan and a bunch of people that really wanted to put it out, and so we sort of got together every week and put it out for a while. We did it weekly for a while. You have all those, don't you?
I have smatterings of them, and because I don't know Um, I've seen several different copies. I have Gil Johnston still, and I had Marty Birdsell, who had a fairly completed set of them, but I don't know that I've ever seen all of them.
I don't
It seems
have
like
them all. I have most of the ones that we did.
I
But,
yours may be missing. A lot of yours. Maybe I can take those and have those photocopied at some time.
yeah, I
Not
don't think I can dig them out right at the moment.
not
'Cause
at the moment.
all that stuff is in those boxes, but I'm not sure where.
Not at the moment, but
Photographs.
if you have them, that as I get closer to looking again to make sure the archives are full and complete, or as
Yeah.
complete as can be. Um,
Well, there's a ranger. Gil Johnston wrote me a story about wrote me a letter and mentioned that there's a ranger that Bill used to work with up in Yosemite that's doing a book about him.
oh, really?
But
Hmm.
this, of course, will be a book about him as a ranger, I guess, because most of it, there were some visits by his ranger friends to Mountain Drive, but very few.
Do you remember any of those?
The visits?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a fellow named Sharpsmith that used to come down. And I don't know if he's the one that's writing the book or not. He used to come down once or twice a year, just for a day or so, visit. But most of these people, I mean, it's astonishing to me that somebody who knew him principally as a ranger would write a book about him. It shows the vastness of the man's talent. I mean, that he could impress somebody in a field where we hardly know him. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he impressed this other whole group of people enough so that one of them thinks it's worth writing a book about him. I think that's a very impressive thing.
Well, he is mentioned in the back of one of the I saw by happenstance in a book that I picked up in Yosemite on a guidebook of the different trails and hikes. He's referenced as some of his work on the Indian, um, I don't know, edible Indian plants or the edible or diet, Indian
Yeah.
diet um, research or plant research, what kind of plants the Indians used. I haven't looked at this book for a long time, but I was his unpublished work. So obviously, this person knew of some work that Bill Neely did that I didn't even know he'd done in that area, as far as I guess plant uses, Indian plant uses, or something. I think was the reference, as I'm getting it. But so he is referenced. Um, I wonder where all those papers have disappeared to, and
I don't know. If they were published, they're in the library somewhere.
no, they were unpublished.
Well,
So
maybe they're with his
unpublished papers.
diaries, but I don't know. Maybe Alex Cole or Chris,
Mm.
you know, or Jeff.
What would you like to be remembered for?
I mean, vis-a-vis Mountain Drive.
Mountain Drive, yeah.
I don't know. I guess being there. I came in at about the peak of it. I mean, I wish I'd been there earlier, but I missed a lot of good stuff.
Mm.
But I also was present for a lot of good stuff. Well, I don't know. Maybe if I write a good novel about it, I'd like to be remembered for that. But I don't know that I'll ever write a good novel about it. It's a very hard thing to do.
Mm.
It's hard to pin down Bill Neely because he's such a talent, and he was so evil in a lot of ways. I don't know. I can't tell you what I'd like to be remembered for. I guess just being there.
Mm.
Somebody asked me when I had a heart attack a year and a half ago. I was in the hospital for a week, and there was this very interesting nurse, and she asked me what was the most interesting thing that ever happened to me in my life. And I, without hesitation, I said living on Mountain Drive for 20 years. Which she didn't know anything about. She didn't know what I was talking about.
A rare exception here in Santa Barbara. I find most people know Mountain Drive in some context. Have something to hang on. They usually feel very strongly about it either. But they always seem to know something about it. Or an amazing number of people. I'm sure that's changed too. Santa Barbara's gotten quite large. But is there anything I've forgotten to ask you that you would like to add?
Oh, probably, but I can't think of it now. I'm kind of talked out at the moment.
Yeah. I think that I really want to thank you and
well, I'm really glad to do it. I have very fond memories of Mountain Drive.
Maybe if there are any, if I get through and listen to this, there might be some follow-up questions that I could go, oh darn, why didn't I ask him that?
Well,
Maybe if
come
I could
back,
come
you
back.
know, or
okay. Great. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, Dick.